You're now in the third and final session of the self-regulation training. Today's learning objectives are that you'll be able to define self-evaluation as it relates to self-regulation, all within the context of leader development. Additionally, you'll be able to create strategies for evaluating your personal growth as a leader. As a result of this whole series, you'll be able to apply self-regulation principles to a personal leader development plan. So at the end of today's session, I'll basically recap everything we've covered and give you an opportunity to create a leader development plan for yourself. So it will include revising any goals, thinking through how you're going to monitor your progress, how you're going to evaluate what you're doing, and how you'll catch yourself if you think you might relapse. To meet the objectives that I just described, we'll follow this agenda for today's session. First, we'll review the self-monitoring strategies you created last session. You'll do some reflecting on why those did or did not work for you. Then I'll introduce self-evaluation and why it relates to leader development at all. Finally, we'll dive into some hands-on strategies for self-evaluating your own progress along your leader development. So at this time, please click on the link in the Canvas website that's going to take you to either a Word document or a Qualtrics survey link where you can enter responses to the following questions. So I'll give you time to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so by now you should have either a Word document or an online survey in front of you where you can enter responses. We're going to first review the self-monitoring strategies that you came up with last session. At the end of last session, you came up with some strategies that were tailored to you. If you didn't use the ones that you thought, think about why not. What was the hindrance? Was it something that had to do with you? You just didn't like that strategy? It didn't seem to work for you? Or was there something in the environment that you might want to change so you're more likely to use it in the future? Maybe you need to tweak the strategies slightly or pick new ones altogether. If you remember, these were strategies for overcoming challenges you anticipated encountering in regards to your goal. Did you actually encounter the challenges you thought you would? If not, what else came up? What was difficult and when you were trying to work towards your goal? This is time for reflection around anything that you tried between last session and now. Simply press pause here and stop the video and come back when you're ready. As a reminder, in the first audio recording session, you set goals to develop your own leadership. In the second session, you learned some strategies for self-monitoring your behavior or tracking what you do as a leader. This was so that you have an accurate idea of how you are actually doing in regards to your goal, so that you can compare current performance with desired performance. Without that standard of reference, it's pretty difficult to know how much further you have to go until you've reached where you want to be. As a side note, I don't think we ever really reach peak performance as a leader. The idea is that we're always improving. Even really seasoned veterans in leadership still are learning lessons about how to be a better leader. And since it's so interpersonal, it's so context specific, the learning really never stops. So today's session is all about evaluating the behavior that you previously were monitoring between last session and this. This means making a judgment call about what level of performance means to you and how that will inform your future self-development efforts. Self-evaluation is defined as reflecting on current and past experience, making sense out of complex situations, and ultimately altering how you think about yourself in light of that new information. A lot of managers think that the best way to develop your leadership is simply through experience. The implicit line of thinking there is that the more you lead, the better leader you become. And while there's definitely some truth to that sentiment, not all experiences are created equal. Similar to how if you're practicing a sport, but you're only going through the motions, you're not really going to get better at that sport. The same is true for leader development. The extent to which a leadership experience is truly developmental rests on whether you're intentional about trying to learn from that experience, either before, during, or after it happens. Think about it. Most of your life just sort of happens, and a lot of life happens over and over again. Unless we really sit down to sort through those experiences, we consider what worked, what didn't work, and how we can personally do better the next time, the chances of improving over time really aren't that high. So you can see that it really isn't just experience that develops leadership. Rather, it's intentional experience and self-reflection that fosters growth as a leader. And we're trying to build your skill to doing just that in this training. So now that we've covered why self-evaluation is so important for your ongoing leader development, let's move into some actionable strategies for actually doing it. Self-evaluation strategies fall into 3 main buckets. First, we have reward strategies. Second, task adjustment strategies. And third, constructive thought pattern strategies. These come from 2 prominent researchers named Neck and Houghton. Reward strategies are basically about self-reward, self-punishment, and self-cueing. So, self-reward could mean giving yourself a mental pat on the back when you know you did something new and challenging. You're basically rewarding yourself for trying that new experience. Or it could be something more physical, like pouring yourself an extra glass of wine, or allowing yourself extra time, leaving the office early, whatever it may be for you. Self-punishment can also be useful, but you need to make sure that this one isn't overdone. So for example, you might force yourself to stay a little bit later in the office than you normally would to fill out an employee's evaluation that you should have done earlier. Say you want to prioritize your employee's development, but you're just not making time for it during the day. So you punish yourself a little bit by staying late to complete it. There's definitely diminishing returns here though, so you want to be careful. Over-exercising this strategy could be detrimental to the pursuit of your goal and to your overall well-being, so just minor punishments is enough. And it's important that you reframe punishment so that you can transform failures into opportunities for improvement and not dwell on the negative. The last of the reward strategies is called self-cueing. And this means putting reminders in your environment so that you remember what your goal is and why you're striving for it. So you could change the wallpaper on your phone or edit the screensaver on your computer. And it could be just pictures or words, things that are motivational, calendar reminders, writing yourself notes, saving them in key places. Basically, it's putting reminders in your environment so you don't forget A, that you even have a goal you're working towards, and B, why you're working towards it. The second bucket of self-evaluation strategies is called task adjustment. This one isn't as much about carrots and sticks as the last one. It's more about altering the experience itself so that you're more likely to enjoy doing it. For example, you could add more enjoyable features into an activity so that the process is inherently more satisfying. The second side of task adjustment strategies includes changing your own perception of the experience. So the first part was changing the nature of the task itself. And the second part is about changing how you perceive that task. It's a slight difference, but it's important. Unpleasant tasks in leadership are inevitable, as you know. There might be some things you really enjoy about being a leader and others that are just inherently uncomfortable or annoying for you to do. But it's still important for your job, for your role as a leader. Focus on the part of the task that you do find enjoyable. Find some small glimmer of something that you like and focus your energy and efforts on that piece. Another strategy for self-evaluation has to do with after-action reviews. And after-action reviews are basically team huddles or debriefs after an experience. You can do it in a team or you can do it alone, but it's something that the US military often uses to help its crews learn from mistakes and build what they call collective intuition. And collective intuition is this sense that everyone is on the same page, everyone understands what actions need to be taken, and what the coordination needs are among the team, and people just begin to act because they work in concert so much and they know what each other needs, and there's this collective sense that they understand each other and are moving in the same direction. So, some key characteristics of good after-action reviews are the following. First, you want to focus on just a couple really important issues. There's going to be a lot to cover in an after-action review, but you really want to focus on the most important things. Try not to dissect everything. You just don't have the time or the cognitive energy to be able to do that. Second, make sure that the reflection happens pretty soon after the actual event. This echoes the strategy I introduced in the video on self-monitoring. Because our memories are so selective in what they remember, reflection needs to be close to the event itself. If you'll remember correctly, our memories are hardwired to filter out the information about ourselves that isn't so great. The information that makes us look pretty bad, we are just hardwired to forget. We don't want to hold on to that information. But what we do hold on to is all the good stuff about us, all the things that make us look really awesome. And because of those biases, what we call cognitive or brain biases, it makes it really difficult to hold a good after-action review if our memories are clouded and distorted. So the way to get around this is by holding the after-action review pretty close to the actual event itself. Third, the reflection process in the after-action review should be somewhat structured. Having some set questions that you regularly ask yourself or your team is a good idea so that the process becomes routine and standardized. This helps to build synthesis and integration across experiences. So if you have the same questions and you have similar answers, you can start to understand patterns and flows of information and to make sense of things in a new way that you couldn't have seen before had you not asked the same questions. And then finally, you want to make sure that your after-action review reflection feeds back into action pretty quickly. Don't let the learning opportunities go to waste. Make sure that they loop back into new experiences. After all, that's the whole point of an after-action review. The third bucket of self-evaluation strategies is building constructive thought patterns. Our minds are like muscles. The more we use certain neural networks and associations between thoughts, the stronger they become, and the more quickly our brain goes down that particular thought pattern. In light of that science, we need to train our minds to think in certain ways to help us think and act differently as leaders. One way to build constructive thought patterns is to identify when irrational or overly critical or overly confident thoughts come up, and then we actively replace them with productive or functional thoughts. Another strategy here is to focus on positive self-talk. Self-talk is defined as what people covertly tell themselves. It's that dialogue that's always running through your mind without really giving it much thought. Training yourself to increase the optimistic self-talk is motivating, and it can help you get closer to your ultimate end goals by increasing your confidence and hope for the future. And we know from a lot of research on leader development that hope is extremely important. If you're familiar with the popular book and movie The Hunger Games, you'll remember President Snow, one of the main characters, saying, "Hope is a powerful thing." It's true. Hope for a future way of doing things is ultimately what keeps us going every day and moving towards our goals. Without a sense that things could be better in the future, that the future state is somehow more desirable than where we are now, without that feeling, it's really difficult to get motivated to work hard. So it's important to think about things that will remind you why you're hopeful, why the future is better, why you want to get better as a leader, and why that's going to help you in your career, in your family, and whatever it is that's motivating you to reach this developmental goal. And part of what makes this strategy effective is your ability to recognize negative self-talk and positive self-talk. Sometimes we might have overly critical views of ourselves, and also, which is often the case with managers, we might have overly positive views of the self, overly confident, maybe a little bit of hubris. But the important thing is that we want our self-talk to be functional, meaning it should be based on factual evidence and logical reasoning. It should produce positive behaviors and emotions, and should be in line with your personal goals. Dysfunctional self-talk, on the other hand, isn't really based in factual evidence, and it doesn't hold up to logical reasoning. It produces negative emotions and behaviors, and eventually undermines your progress towards your goal. So it'll look different for each of us, but some questions to ask yourself about you and your functional or dysfunctional self-talk is whether what you're telling yourself, that running dialogue or script in your mind, does it stack up to what others are telling you in feedback? Does it match what the 360-degree report says about you? Does it match what followers are just telling you out of their own accord? Does it match the sense that you have of what your team is like, how they're performing, business objectives? If all of that is good and you have a good sense of how your team is doing, it should all line up and match. Consider your mental imagery, or the picture you have in your mind of an experience without physically doing it. The more you visualize success, the more likely you are to actually achieve it. Now, I'm not saying you should go sit in a room in your office somewhere and just visualize success. I'm definitely not supporting something like that. But there does appear to be scientific evidence that proactively attempting to control what your mind pictures does affect your performance on a task. In a review of 35 studies on the topic, mental imagery was found to have a positive relationship with performance on tasks. So this is from a meta-analysis, meaning it was a study of 35 studies where all the different correlations and relationships between variables were added up and aggregated. And they still found a positive relationship between mental imagery and performance. And it was especially strong if subjects mentally practiced their success in close proximity to the performance, and if the task was mental rather than physical. Of course, it's not a direct relationship, and simply imagining something coming to fruition doesn't mean that it will. And of course, as you might have guessed, mental practice is less helpful than actual physical practice. But mental practice is still a helpful self-development strategy, because so much of what we do in self-development, and self-regulation in particular, is really mental. It's about reflection and thoughts and managing emotions and checking where we are in regards to our goal. All of that is a mental process. So you can see how using these kinds of mental strategies can be helpful. Finally, an everyday strategy for self-evaluation is reflective questioning. If you've ever participated in any kind of professional development workshop or coaching engagement one-on-one, I guarantee you've encountered this technique before, whether you realized it or not. Basically, reflective questioning is asking yourself a series of questions to prompt your thinking critically about an event and its significance for you. Coaches will use this technique to help clients come to their own conclusions and formulate their own thoughts on a topic. It's a way of guiding conversation without inserting predetermined dialogue or commentary. You can engage others in this process with you, or you can think through these questions alone. Either way, the idea is to examine, reflect, and evaluate. You might use some of the following reflective questions in your own practice. How was this experience for me? Who gained as a result of that leadership behavior? If I had to do it over again, would I do anything differently? In which situations would I do that again? In which settings would what I did not work? Are there important contingencies that I should be thinking about for the future? So these are the kinds of questions that you can see would get your mind thinking about when, where, in which situation, costs and benefits, things like that. It helps to deepen the learning from the experience that you just had. So with that, we've pretty much concluded the series. Before finishing, let's review the main concepts I've presented in each session. In the goal-setting audio recording, you heard about how to set specific and challenging goals. And I hopefully convinced you that specific and challenging goals are better than do your best goals. You also got the SMART framework for setting future goals. So S stands for specific, M stands for measurable, A stands for achievable, R stands for relevant, and T for time-bound. And then in the self-monitoring session, you learned some strategies for closely following what you're doing as a leader so that you can regulate those behaviors. In today's session, you learned about self-evaluation. Once you've captured what you actually do as a leader in a process called self-monitoring, then self-evaluation helps you determine what to do with that information. How can you regulate the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are pertinent to how you lead others on your team? Now we're going to take about 15 minutes for you to develop a personal leader development plan using all of the self-regulation knowledge you've gained throughout this training. In considering what will go into this plan, I encourage you now to think about all that you've learned. Are there any key takeaway points that really hit home for you? Anything you learned that surprised you? Think back especially to reflection that you might have done in between sessions, because that's where the meat of self-development really occurs. The actual training itself is just to present information. What happens in between the trainings is really where self-development happens. Were you able to stick to your plans and goals? If not, there might be some motivational issues at play. Meaning, maybe that's not the best goal for you because you really don't want to achieve it that badly. The good news is that you still have time to pick a new goal. If the goal you originally set for yourself needs to change, go ahead and do that now. Think through the sub-goals, or things you'd need to accomplish first in order to get to those higher-order goals. And of course, think about the SMART framework. Revise it according to each criteria, like we did in the first audio podcast. Consider resources that you have, like time, people, and money. Who or what might get in your way, and how can you realistically plan to overcome that? I'm not going to provide too much structure here for your leader development plan because this is the time when you get to apply all that you've learned throughout this training. We're going to wrap up today's session. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns, please always feel free to email me at Dana, D-A-Y-N-A, .walker, W-A-L-K-E-R, @cgu.edu. As a departing wish, I hope that you remember that leader development is self-development. Development isn't something that's done to you, it's something you do for yourself. Thanks.